Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be talking about some of our drying mediums. The purpose of these is to enhance blending, customize your drying time, or allow for some sort of layer or glaze. Firstly, MM1, our drying retarder, one of our oldest mediums. You can either mix up to about 5% in your paint, any more than this, and it really doesn't help with the drying time much more and can affect the water fastness of it. Otherwise, you can also mix in with water, which helps stuff like the metallics, inorganic pigments like earth colours work much better on a canvas. Next is our open medium. Very similar to drying retarder, however, a lot easier to use and a lot less problematic if you use too much. Similar kind of thing, paint a strip of your normal paint and then paint a strip of about 5 to 10% mixed open medium. Next, we've got our water-based patina. This is excellent for providing a glaze. In this situation, we've painted once underneath, mixed our MM20 water-based patina with another colour and then glazed over the top. You can even do this with smaller objects, even something like this on embossed or textured wallpaper. Our last medium is MM16, faux finish and marbling gel. This one's quite interesting because there are a number of techniques that we can apply. The first one is water marbleizing, where you mix the MM16 in a tub of water, put some inks on the top, and then you can get this awesome marbling effect. The second is rag rolling, where you can see in our example here, we've mixed our MM16 with the paint and used a rag to roll it around the artwork. The last technique we can use with MM16 is your good old marbling, where in this situation we've painted a base coat of white, then mixed a black and a grey with our MM16 and dragged it across the surface with a feather. You can do this with all sorts of different kinds of things like sponges as well. Find which technique you like best and you can put it straight onto your card in the MM16 section.
Matisse Medium 1, drying retarder. It's simple. Add it to the paint, the acrylic paints, to slow the drying time. Don't use any more than about 5% drying retarder to paint. You can add the drying retarder into other mediums such as water if you like, or acrylic painting medium to reduce down the colours. This will slow the drying time of the paint. Now how much? I can't tell you that, no one can, because it will depend on the humidity and the temperature when you're actually painting, and also the thickness of the paint. If you paint film coating twice as thick, it won't take twice as long to dry. It will take maybe 10 times longer to dry. It takes exponentially longer to dry the thicker the coat, so keep that in mind as well. Drying retarder slows the drying time of the paint. It's pretty simple. But how it does it is quite interesting, and it can have some other flow-on effects as well. So one of the first things to think about is how paint dries. Okay, probably like watching grass grow, but it is actually quite interesting on an atomic or on a microscopic level. Basically what happens, if you think of a whole lot of balls in a big room and filled with water, and the water is evaporating off the top, and all the little balls, the little beads are starting to push together, but the top is what we call closing off, or it's joining. What happens is these beads join together and they what we call coalesce, or they cure, to form the strip of plastic, which is basically what an acrylic is, what the paint is. And it forms this strip of plastic, and all the little beads chemically bond together to one thing, impregnated with the pigment or the colours. Okay, that's the basis for the paint. What happens with the drying retarder is it wraps itself around those little beads and doesn't allow them to actually join together, or at least it slows the drying time of the water or the evaporation of the water, and can also, if you put too much in, can actually stop them from joining together and stop them from curing. So, as we said, the paint dries from the top where the water is evaporated off, the beads join in together, they cure, and if water's trapped underneath, then the paint is not dry. And you'll see this a lot on your palette where it forms a skin, and that's the top actually drying and starting to cure, but the water being trapped underneath. Now, with the drying retarder, what we're trying to do is stop those beads at the top from actually joining and curing. And it will do that to a certain extent. I mean, obviously there will still be curing going on and it will still form a skin. It just takes much longer to do that. Firstly, it slows the evaporation of the water. And secondly, it stops them actually joining together. Now, the beads. Now, if you put too much drying retarder in, and how much is too much? 3 to 5% is probably about the perfect amount. Too much is in excess of 15 to 20%. So 15 to 20% of drying retarder to paint, and what you're going to have is those little beads of acrylic are not going to be able to touch each other to actually chemically join together. So, for all intents and purposes, the paint could be dry. It looks dry, but it hasn't cured. There hasn't been that linking going on. And so what you've got is a whole lot of little dried bits of acrylic, but they haven't bonded together to make that nice film coating, which is what we're after. So we've got a dry film, and it, for all intents and purposes, looks as though it's dry and it's cured, but you take a wet rag and it'll come straight off because there's been no bonding, it hasn't stuck together, it hasn't adhered, it hasn't glued, and so it's just going to come straight off. It might take several months for that drying retarder to eventually evaporate out, which it'll do. And in fact, there's some companies at the moment that are producing paints like that have too much, if you like, drying retarder in them. And so they stay open for much longer, but they can also be re-wet. It's just doing the same thing. It's adding too much drying retarder in. It's not too much if that's the effect that you're after. If we're just trying to blend and we want a nice sort of deep green, we're just going to run this backwards and forwards like this to blend a nice green. That's terrific. I've mixed a little bit of drying retarder in here. As I say, about 3 to 5%. And I'm mixing that in with the water and basically getting rid of most of that water now. You'll see it's much easier to blend. It helps to lubricate the paint a little bit and also obviously slows the drying time. So you can see here it's really easy to blend, not just from the perspective of the paint being open or being wet, but also because it gets a bit of lubrication as well. And the paint will now stay open or wet for much longer than where we've mixed the two colours with no drying retarder. We've been filming now for probably more than 20 minutes and I've got to say this is really starting to pull. Up here where it's still quite thick, it's fine. Back down here, I'm going to find that very hard to blend back in again. You'll still see the blue. Whereas, now this is actually a little bit thinner, I've got to say. But as I mix this in, it's quite a bit thicker here. It's still blending quite happily, and so it's still remaining quite workable, and it is thinner than the paint that's here, because I've had to add a bit more in just to try and get it moving. So how long will drying retarder extend your drying time? Look, that's a bit like how long is a piece of string. It will depend, as we said before, on the thickness of the paint. It'll also depend on the humidity and the temperature. And that will have a huge bearing on just how long the paint takes to dry in general, and also when we're using a drying retarder. So the drying retarder, it will chemically slow the drying time to a point. As I say, don't add any more than 5% because it can, any more than 5% or above 15% will definitely render the paint water sensitive, even once it's dried. So you could use the traditional drying retarder. Most people make that, add it to the paint. But one issue with the drying retarder, if you add a little bit too much in or a lot too much in, over say 10 or 15% to the paint, it can actually make or keep the paint water sensitive, for some time, and I mean weeks, maybe even months, after the paint has actually dried. Enter stage left, open medium. So the open medium has drying retarder in it, but it has a special binder that allows the paint, once dry, to also be water-fast. And it doesn't matter how much of the open medium you use. So you can use 5% open medium to your paint or 5% paint to the open medium. It really doesn't matter. Why would you add only 5% paint? Because the open medium gives a fantastic translucent finish, and so it's terrific for glazing as well. But back to the main problem, acrylics drying too quickly. Most people like acrylics because they dry quickly. Oils tend to take days and days and weeks to dry, whereas acrylics, you can keep layering. In a week, you could put several layers on where you may only get one on with oils, and much thicker as well. However, if you want to get those really even graduations of tone or change of colour, mixing colours together over large areas or very subtle blends, you may need a little bit of extra time to do that. Now, in most normal climates, acrylics don't have a problem with that. But in really warm, dry climates, you will need something like open medium. Traditionally, portrait painters will use oils even if they do their underpainting in acrylic and then oils over the top, because they have longer to work their paint. Well, now the option of using open medium means that you can use acrylic all the way through and still have that open time to blend and get those subtle variations in colour. How long a drying retarder or the open medium is going to keep your paint open for, you can do a very simple test like we're going to do here. So if you want to test how long the open medium will keep your paint open for in your climate, being temperature and humidity, we'll just do a quick test here. I'll show you how to do that. Normally in the lab, we would use a little bit more precise methodology of putting down exactly the same amount of the two paints and then measure it off against time. So with the flow formula here, you can see that the open medium really has not changed the texture at all, and it hasn't changed the opacity of the paint. It really hasn't changed the paint at all. So now I'm just going to try and get two as even coverage strips of paint out as I can. And it gives a nice sort of lubrication as well. So blending colours is an absolute breeze. So now what I'm going to do is wait for a minute, and then I'll actually use my finger and just rub each strip, and bit by bit they will start to dry. So at the 5-minute mark, the paint was really starting to pull a little bit. It's still wet right on the top, but it's really starting to dry off now, finding it hard to move, versus the paint with the open medium in it. When I touch it, it feels completely wet still. So I'll keep doing this up until 10 minutes, and then I'll leave it for 5-minute intervals. But you know, at the 5 to 6 minute mark, with the heat of the room and the camera lights, the paint by itself is starting to be almost touch dry. So that's barely moving now at 7 minutes, and the paint with the medium is quite fresh. Now obviously the different thicknesses that you apply the paint with will make a huge difference. Just a little thicker will give you considerably longer in drying time. So we're going to stop now at 10, and come back in 5 minutes for 15 and then 20. But just to recap, the straight paint is pretty well dry. If we took a wet brush, we could probably scrub back into that, but I could still be blending with the open medium. So we've got, almost twice the time out of it. We'll have considerably more. So we're up to the 15-minute mark. This is pretty well completely dry, and this with our medium is just starting to dry off now. So yeah, it's starting to dry at about twice the time for what we've painted out here. Adding a little bit more medium will indeed increase the drying time again. So this is an easy test that you can do just to compare for your situation, your temperatures, humidity and that sort of thing, to make sure you know how much longer it's going to take for the paint to dry using open medium. So the benefits of using open medium with your paint is that you get much longer to blend colours, to cover larger areas with a nice even coverage. And also open medium can be used with any of the Matisse range, structure, flow, fluids. It's sort of a medium viscosity, so it'll work with any one of those acrylics and obviously slow their drying time. So if you're looking to keep your acrylics open for longer, you're looking for a retarder gel or a open medium or a slow drying medium, you've found it all in one. The Matisse MM31 open medium. Matisse medium MM20, water-based patina and antiquing medium. Patina is just the sort of time-worn colour or finish that an object ends up with by collecting dirt or the verdigris on copper or metals where they've oxidised. This is a really thin medium that is basically all acrylic binder with drying retarder in it, so it slows the drying time of the paint. The idea of this medium is to mix it with the paints to allow you to get glazes. What the water-based patina does is slows the drying time of the paints right down, allowing you to move them out, use them as a glaze or a stain. But once they dry water fast, so you can't take them off, as you'd expect the paint to do. So no matter how little of the paint you use, versus, for instance, if you used water and you just reduce the paint right out, you might get that nice glaze. But the problem is you're reducing the binder part of the paint as well, the glue part, and so you might find the paints not being as stable if you go to varnish over the top or you wipe them down with a damp cloth or something like that. So really thin glazes of colour, generally for the purpose of antiquing, you're laying down an earth colour over the top of a painted finish to make it look old, and this will help slow the drying time of the paint and allow you to also spread out evenly, but will dry to a water-resistant finish. And that's it, MM20. Matisse Medium, number 16, faux finish and marbling gel. Well, it helps to slow the drying time of the paint a little bit, just the sheer fact that you will have more bulk of paint. You reduce the colour out, so its main aim is for glazes and also to stop colours mixing. So when you're actually doing marbling, the faux finish called marbling, it will stop the colours blending together. most of the mediums that we make at Matisse, they all wash up in water, soap and water, warm water. Make sure before they dry that you do clean up your utensils, your brushes, your palette knives, whatever you're using, to make sure it makes it much easier for you to get them clean. That's MM16 in a nutshell.
So, that's all about drying. I hope you've learned something today and all the different things you can do, like enhancing your blending, manipulating your drying time, and even some cool marbling effects. Thank you and see you next time.